lead us with the questions.
Yes, absolutely. So Michael is asking as a tech question about spotlighting the speakers, Gab, just so that we see the face of who is talking. Zoom is not my tech forte, so if that is something that Gab can do, fantastic. So I thought it would be great if you could each just take a moment to introduce yourselves and how you're connected to the back to school adventures. Let's just call them adventures. So I'll just go through people as I see them on my screen, if that's okay with all of you. The first person that I can see is Eden.
I was afraid you were going to say that. No, I'm happy to go first. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Eden Hagos. I am a mom of 3 children, 2 of whom are school-aged, with another one on the way. I'm a graduate student at the Dalavana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, doing my master's in public health, and I'm a health promoter by profession. I've worked in community in Toronto here for over 20 years. And my academic studies are focused on the social determinants of health, such as racism, gender, LGBTQ, immigration, poverty, and all of those really fun, really high-level things that impact our health. So very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you here. Chris.
Hello, everyone. And I'm Chris Moyes. I'm the current trustee for Toronto Centre and University of Rosedale. I've been a trustee since 2016. And during my tenure, I was vice chair for 2 terms. I'm currently the vice chair of budget, which is on everyone's mind now these days. Just ended a budget meeting. And yeah, I've lived in the ward for the last 20 plus years. I was a counselor at St. Mike's Hospital for 22 years. I own a small business in the St. Lawrence market area. So I'm very much part of this community, and what happens in our community, you know, is important to me. And I work very hard to make sure that our schools and our students get the resources that they need. So that's gonna be my little intro.
Thank you. All right, Michael.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Erickson. I'm a teacher in the TDSB, so I teach high school. I've been teaching for over 20 years in Toronto. And just to be clear, I am here to share my thoughts and ideas as an educator. I am not representing the Toronto District School Board or the OSSTF. All thoughts and opinions are my own. But I think it is useful to hear maybe a bit from the teacher perspective, and share some of my thoughts around pedagogy and options going forward, and people might have questions for teachers. So I'm here to provide that voice. But like many of us, I don't have a lot of answers right now. So I'll do my best, and I'm grateful to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Mm-hmm. And Jill.
There we are. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm Jill Andrew, MPP for Toronto St. Paul's and a proud member of the Ontario NDP Black Caucus. I'm also the Women's Issues and Culture Critic. And maybe even more significantly than that, I consider myself a lifelong educator. I've been a child and youth worker. I've been a high school teacher and a student equity program advisor. So certainly concerned and worried and anxious and frustrated, quite frankly, with the government's back to school plan, or well, plan in air quotes.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Just to introduce myself briefly, my name is Anna Penner. I am supporting Seed and Sprout, and particularly on this panel today. I'm also a parent of 3 kids, 2 of them school-aged, so this hits very close to home for me as well, and I'm really happy to be chatting to all of you about this. So the first question is really just, what are you hearing from the families that you're connected to about back to school? What are their hopes? What are their fears? What are their questions or confusions? Because I see a lot of all of those things coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just speak to it as you want. Anyone can speak.
Well, I can start if that's okay. So I get at least 100 plus emails a day. I'm drowning in emails, and people are very concerned, and rightfully so. There hasn't been a lot of clarity from the ministry. They keep moving the goalposts whenever we as a school board present something. Like I said, just prior to this call, we had to reopen the budget we passed last week just to, make some changes to it and using our reserve 1% to 2%, which is really problematic for us because that money that's being called reserve actually comes from money that's allocated, for example, for long-term disability to our staff, like Michael who's at TDSB, or, another example would be, artificial turf. A lot of our playgrounds are in disrepair, so we put money aside for that. So now we're taking money out of those pockets to put into hiring more teachers for September. But that being said, parents are concerned because of the safety of their own kids going back to school, and more specifically in the elementary pool. I think the secondary pool, we kind of have it under control in the sense that, it's 15 kids per class, and it's in 4 days increments, 2 classes. It's a quad semester system. And again, I think we've ironed out a lot of the problems there. But the major issue is elementary. And again, in regards to social distancing and having 30 odd kids in the class, that's problematic for a lot of students and teachers, right? Because we care about not only our students, but our staff also. And working closely with Toronto Public Health. So for me, as my role as trustee, is really try to reassure people and provide as much information as I can to them. And again, new information is coming in daily. So, I'm trying very much to be present and just sort of help people along the way. And so, yeah, that's the gist of it for now, anyway.
Anyone else?
I'm happy to jump in. Yeah. Just to build off of what you were saying, I'm also hearing from a lot of families, a lot of frustration around the fact that, the ministry and the government has had more than 5 months since schools closed to start thinking about this. And at this point, as Chris said, the ministry keeps pushing back. My kids are at TDSB, so in particular with TDSB, I think it's 4 plans that have been submitted around elementary schools that have been rejected in the past few weeks. And so the ministry is taking this time because they need time to figure things out, but at the same time, they're putting all this pressure on parents through the survey that went out last week and the email that's coming out this week to make a decision, and not only make a decision without any information about what school is actually going to look like in September, but now it sounds like parents aren't going to have the option to move between virtual learning and in class. So the decision we make now, we're expected to stick to for the foreseeable future without any understanding of what's going to happen once kids are back in school, what the situation is going to be in terms of the pandemic in the next few months. And also a key thing I've been hearing are concerns around equity. So of course, some families are moving to pods and private tutors. Other parents, such as myself, I'm really weighing the options of what do I do for my family, for my children and their needs, but how do I do this in a way that I'm not then having a detrimental effect on the public education system? So do I pull my kid out of school? Because for us, I've got a kid going into JK, a child in grade 2 French immersion, I've got a preschooler, and I've got a baby on the way. So do I put my 6-year-old into the virtual school with no idea of who his teachers are going to be, no idea of where they're going to be in the French curriculum, or do I pull them out completely and just homeschool, which is an option for me, but then know that that means that the school, our public school, our local school, which we have a really great relationship with, is then going to lose funding because I'm pulling my kids out of the system. So I do hear a lot of parents saying that they feel like we're in a position where we have to make choices now between our kids' mental health, our family's physical health, our survival, right? Because parents are choosing without any support from the government in terms of service ending, people are being pressured to go back to work, but at the same time, what are the implications for our public education system? So it's just a lot of pressure.
Go ahead, Jill. You're muted right now.
I think we got to call a table, right? I mean, this government's plan for back to school is really a larger plan around privatization of our public education system, right? I think what I'm hearing predominantly from parents is the overwhelming concern around class sizes. And I want to stop for a minute and say, regardless of your party, right, regardless of what the official opposition has been fighting for since the beginning, smaller classes, we got to listen to public health. We've got to listen to the actual experts. And this is what the government refuses to do. By not limiting our elementary classroom sizes. Our littlest ones, our most vulnerable ones, you know, we teach them in character education to hug each other when someone falls, or share your pen or your pencil if someone's pen or pencil doesn't work. You know, we teach them to have empathy. And now we are having them unlearn all of that to learn to be these little mini adults, you know, adhering to social distancing, you know, adhering to not touching the faucets in the bathroom, you know, which is a reason why we've been advocating for, you know, touchless faucets in washrooms as well too. You know, but really the big thing is the confusion around a lack of a transparent, accountable plan, specifically around smaller classrooms for our elementary schools. You know, we are hearing parents ask, well, what the heck's happening on the bus? You know, if they're not socially distanced on the bus, how can it then translate into a socially distanced classroom? It just simply can't, right? We're hearing that we need more educators, you know, we need more education workers to help keep our kids safe for a safe September, you know, but the government's pennies, as you all know, you know, will barely fund one person, a half person, you know? So again, we're being left up a creek without a paddle. And just to touch on what Eden had to say, you know, with regards to equity, I've been hearing that a lot too. You know, in my work in the equity department, we ran GSAs, we supported GSAs, we supported equity clubs, you know, the kind of spaces that help make some kids feel at home, especially when home is not a safe space for them, right? We haven't heard a thing about what's happening to extracurricular, you know, supports and resources for our kids. So there's a lot going on. And I think we just want the truth at this point so that parents can decide. And the whole piece around choices, you know, and the government, well, keep your kids home if you want. This is an economic choice. This is an illusionary choice for most of the parents who are emailing and calling me. You know, parents just can't make that decision. And the small few who can are feeling terrible for the very reasons that have been mentioned about, you know, potentially pulling funding out of the public school system. So what we have is a government that has left parents without much choice, you know, without much choice at all. And it could mean the safety and the health of their kids. It could mean the safety and the health of grandparents who might be living at the home. We have a lot of intergenerational households. The plan is broken and it needs to be fixed. And the government needs to listen to the experts. You know, I've spoken to 6-year-olds that have a better education plan for opening September than the Ford government does. You know, we got to listen to the public health officials. We got to listen to our doctors, you know, to folks who do this, who study this, you know, who have a handle on it better than this government and the Minister of Education does. Thank you.
Michael, do you have anything you want to add?
Sure. You know, I agree with every syllable everyone has said so far, for sure. You know, as a high school teacher, I'm very grateful that I'm not a Kid 8 teacher. You know, I think I would be feeling really differently about going back to work. I am going to go back to the classroom in September, but both teachers and parents, you know, I have a pretty broad network, are asking me, what should I do? Is it safe? I don't have any answers. You know, looking at the K-8 model, it just looks insane. Like, it looks completely irrational. It doesn't look safe. It doesn't seem to take into account all the things we've learned over the last 5 months. And it also feels like any attempts for boards like the TDSB to offer creative solutions are being met with resistance. So that, to me, is shocking. And I think that, you know, Toronto, our average caseload is now at about, we've held steady at about 20, so like 17, 23 for a few weeks now, which is great. But, you know, I mean, we as teachers know that once you pack everyone indoors, you know, a third of the classrooms in my school don't have a window, right? The ventilation system is built in a 100-year-old building. I mean, there's no proper circulation of air or cleaning of air. It's not realistic in Toronto. So, I mean, that's, once we have to close our windows, that's gonna be an issue. So I think that the K-8 plan just looks very dangerous and scary, to be honest. And I'm really disappointed there wasn't some out-of-the-box thinking going forward. And it's hard to have out-of-the-box creative thinking when you create an artificial deadline, right? The Tuesday after Labor Day is an artificial deadline. Kids required to hit a number of credits before they graduate is an artificial number. The number of minutes to get a credit is an artificial number, right? All of these numbers are created under optimal conditions. So, you know, maybe the board, the Ministry of Education could have said, we're gonna delay grades 10 and 11 till January, and we're gonna reallocate all those teachers to K-8, and we're gonna turn all high schools as spaces from 7 to 12. That would have reduced class sizes, it would have spread out people in different buildings, and it wouldn't have actually cost that much money. We could have made that decision. But I just, you know, there's a shocking lack of creativity. There's a shocking lack of making radical choices. And, you know, if a pandemic, when lives depend on it, aren't a time to make radical choices, when are we gonna make those choices? And, you know, we could also start integrating courses. So rather than high school kids taking, you know, English and history, I mean, we could have done some combined classes and some in tandem learning, but none of that's on the table. And those things take time, right? They take time to plan and organize and be thoughtful about. But when you don't include teachers in the conversation, when you don't ask us our opinions, and you create an artificial deadline, I mean, it's a recipe, I think, for disaster. So, I mean, I'll stop there. I have some other thoughts, I think, as we go on. But I do think that, like, a lack of creativity, a lack of thinking outside the box, and also really a laissez-faire notion around life or death decisions of families is shocking. And I will just actually, one more thing is that, you know, there's some fundamental class issues happening. You know, a lot of the high school plan, for example, assumes that students have fast enough internet at home for multiple users to be streaming video at the same time. So if you've got one parent and 2 high school kids, you're supposed to have 3 people, maybe Zooming or being on Google Classroom at the same time. Like, a lot of people's bandwidth can't handle that. I've been doing online events with Glad Day for 5 months now. And when one person in a house is online, it can be a challenge. And so I just think that there's a lot of things built in here. And so, you know, maybe people are asking themselves too, do I have the bandwidth, literally, to keep my kid at home? Or do I actually have to send them back to the classroom because we don't actually have the technology to support that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anything that anyone wants to add to that, or to what's already been?
Perhaps I could add a little bit. And I'm not here to defend the government because, you know, I'm a school board trustee. And again, like I said earlier, they have not been equal partners in all of this. We at the school board have done a lot of the heavy lifting. And, you know, and we have some of the best staff, and God bless them for the work they've done. And as I mentioned earlier, as we speak, there's actually an emergency board meeting taking place to rejig the numbers for elementary. And someone, I think it was Michael, mentioned, areas that of the city where kids are an equity issue. And we have taken that into account. And using some of our reserve funds, which I totally disagree with, but I went ahead and voted for it anyway. But and we use some of those funds to actually go into areas like region parks in Jamestown in our community, and again Scarborough, Etobicoke, where we know that COVID is more prevalent among people of color, and to reduce the class sizes. For example, for elementary JK to SK, we've reduced the class size to 13.3 in areas that the kids are at risk, and non-impacted schools are 21.6 students. So we have actually, and I could go through the list here, but I won't do that. But we have mitigated some of these things and brought the numbers down at a risk to the system. And also to, we, in regards to high schools, we've gone to quadmester calendars, as I mentioned, and also to making sure that kids have the resources that they need in the high school, and making sure that we have enough teachers to be in the schools. And we've actually increased teachers in the elementary school by 366 teachers. So we hear what the public is saying. We share the concerns, and as a system, we're doing the best as we can. So again, we continue to advocate, as trustees, and to ask the province to give us more resources, which they haven't been able to do. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you. So in our advocacy, whether it's individual or in the systems we're working in, what do you think a safe September would require? What are we advocating for? What do we need? And both what do we need that we can achieve by September or October or January, and also dreaming bigger, what would make us safe? Yeah, Jill. You're on mute again.
I'm unmuted. Wonderful. I think what we need to do, to build on what Michael said, the government needs to think creatively. They need to think radically, and they need to look at what resources communities already have that they can tap into. So let's think about temporary classroom spaces, libraries, community centers, locked classrooms, ways that we can actually achieve a smaller classroom. I think that's an important thing. We absolutely need more custodians. We need more nurses, to help keep our kids safe, keep them healthy, custodians to keep our spaces clean. I think what the government has to remember is that, supporting education, which we know has been, funded well below inflation, like healthcare, is not a leg up. It's not a handout. It's not some sort of neoliberal, charity. It is an investment. Because putting it very, very bluntly, if people go into schools, whether you're a child, whether you're a teenager, whether you're an educator, education worker, central staff, custodian, anyone, if any of the government's mismanagement of this plan ends up exasperating a second wave, what are they going to say then? What will be the response then? So I think that we can spare no expense on ensuring that our schools are safe, our educational centers are safe. And I for the life of me, cannot understand why the government is not listening and seeing that across the boards. Not only making some, penance of supports to high schoolers, or making it possible, to do some budging on the high school platform, but every student deserves to have a safe space. You know, education's a human right. And I can certainly say, as we've discussed as caucus many times, if we were a government, you know, we would have hired more educators and education workers. You know, we would have invested in those more bus drivers that are needed, because we can't afford to have packed buses. That is not safe, according to public health officials. You know, we would make sure that schools had HVAC systems that work. You know, I can attest to what Michael has mentioned, you know, about classrooms that are sweltering, you know, gyms that are sweltering, classrooms where people are literally sweating through their clothing. You know, it's not conducive for a safe September. And this notion of choice, again, we have to unpack it. You know, this notion of choice is a classist, you know, narrative that the government is trying to throw into the air to make the suggestion, I suspect, well, hey, you know, parents decide to send their kids to school, what can we do? We gave them choices. Well, there aren't real choices here if it's a matter of you going to work or losing your job. How do you pay rent then? You know, we also have to consider that childcare, you know, is another issue that's hanging in the wind right now. You know, I was talking to one of our childcare providers, you know, up in St. Paul's. I'm at Queen's Park today, you know, and she said to me, Jill, you know, our childcare fees could go up by 400%, you know, implying that a family of two could be paying upwards of $10K a month for childcare without provincial funding. So we have to also be mindful of the people that these kinds of decisions, these policy decisions by this forward conservative government impact. Just like COVID-19, it is the most marginalized communities, whether we're talking Black communities, Indigenous communities, POCs, you know, our queer, trans, and gender nonconforming communities, working class communities, disabled communities, sole parent communities, which I've heard a lot from. And of course, 80% of those are women-led. So what does it say when the government isn't taking into stock that their decisions have the potential of blocking not just families today, but frankly, generations to come if we don't get this education plan correct?
Absolutely. Michael, yes?
I'm not sure if this answers your question, but Jill made me think of lots of things. So I'm gonna riff off a little bit. I mean, one thing that I just want to name is the complete absence of the federal government in this dynamic. So, you know, the federal government has the most money, has the most access to money, and has the greatest access to a tax base. And so the fact that there haven't been specialized transfer payments coming to education, to public education from the federal government, to me is concerning. I will say that, you know, as, you know, not only a business owner, but as a teacher, one of the things that has been also remarkable to me is that the rollout of federal support has been equal, not equitable. So what I mean by that is that, you know, a North Bay business or school system is getting the same kind of supports as Toronto, right? And so we know we're a densely populated city. We know that it's going to be harder for us to distance from each other. We know that we have higher rates of poverty. We know that we're a magnet city for homelessness and for addiction. You know, there's a whole bunch of factors, and we have a lot of long-term care here too, right? And hospitals. There's a lot of factors in an urban setting that make us a higher risk space, and we're obviously going to have a higher caseload, and then of course a higher chance of transmission. So why there hasn't been specialized or tailored funding to support Toronto, you know, Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, particularly is shocking to me. And I'm not also sure why and I'm sure the provincial government has no love for the federal Liberals. So I'm not sure why there hasn't been a little bit more of a discussion around that. Because, you know, if we all go back into lockdown November 1st because of transmission in schools, and we have to restart CERB payments because of that, I mean, there is going to be a financial cost to not keep our kids safe and keep teachers safe. And so, you know, you can pay now or you can pay later. It's probably cheaper to pay now. And so to me, you know, this idea that even fiscally responsible governments aren't thinking about, you know, the fiscal medium-term realities of these decisions is also surprising to me. So I just want to put that out there. I also worry that, you know, as I go back to the classroom and I start teaching, what's going to happen is that as I'm going to be faced with a lot of students in a lot of dire situations. You know, I know from even talking to students in the first wave when we were remote, you know, there are students who are taking care of family members and parents now who are doing childcare. Many of my students ended up starting to work full time in grocery stores and restaurants as other staff couldn't. So, you know, when we're going to be faced with, I think, a lot of really hard situations with kids, we know that youth have been at home, perhaps with abusive parents, perhaps with difficult, you know, parents or siblings who, when it's not COVID, you can go to a friend's house, you can take a break from that abuse. And it's going to be very evident to us when we go back to schools. And so there's also these sort of like, these additional pieces that I'm going to be faced with on top of having to take my 70-minute lessons and now making 3 hours, take my in-person discussion groups and turn it into a virtual instruction. So this concept that teachers are just instructing is false. And the other thing that COVID is going to create too is that because of restrictions, you know, kids might not have the same access to social workers and librarians. And, you know, we can talk about special education a bit later too, but I know special ed is a major, major concern for many, 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 many parents. And then later on and I just have one maybe quick question for Chris, because I don't know the answer to this question, is that, you know, the TDSB plan has had virtual learning, synchronous virtual learning as a part of it. To what degree is that like sort of ministry mandated? Because, you know, this ministry wanted us to force kids to take online courses, right? Going before the pandemic. And I kind of always suspect that they see this as a golden opportunity to really get us used to online learning as legitimate learning. Whereas I would really push back on that. And so I didn't know how much the expectation of virtual time is, you know, provincially driven, or whether that's like a TDSB choice.
Well, we've been talking to the ministry throughout, as you know, and we've sent back 3 or 4 plans, and they keep rejecting it. They want 50% of students to be in front of a teacher throughout the day. I think we finally came to an agreement where it's 40% of the time, so which is a good thing. And I think too. And again, like, as you know, Michael, there's a difference between e-learning and synchronous learning, right? Or online learning, because we do have, we've always had e-learning at the TDSB, which is separate itself. So, and we still have e-learning itself separate from online learning or remote learning. So, and I think part of the thinking too is that if or when we go into a second wave, which I'm sure we will, that, you know, will be an easy transition to online learning. And one of the things I want to mention too is that, you know, when the pandemic started, you know, the TDSB actually took the initiative and handed out 75,000 iPads to students who didn't have access to those resources in their household. And we also issued out 6,500 iPads with internet for those who didn't have it. So, and I know that, you know, between March and even speaking yesterday, there was some devices that broke, and, you know, kids cannot do synchronous learning without devices. So we've actually reached out to those communities, and we're actually providing that. Again, with no support from the province, right? After we did it at the TDSB, then the minister went on to say that, you know, well, this is what all school boards across the province can do this. But that being said, they didn't provide any funding with that. It was just an announcement like they did it, which really irritates me. Well, that's another story. But just to go back a little bit in regards to the opening of schools, we as the board have decided that, you know, we'll stagger reopening, perhaps for 2 to 3 weeks, and more so for the elementary pool. It is a concern to parents around safety, and it's also a concern to teachers too, as you know, all these different things are happening at the same time. It's all new to everybody. So we have been given permission to stagger reopening up to 3 weeks. So maybe we'll get, SKs, JKs in first, then maybe the 3s and 4s, and, so on and so forth. I lost my train of thought because I had a few things I wanted to say. And also too, in regards to extra space. I mean, like, we've been working closely with the city. The city has said that, we can use the parks and the recreation centers at no cost. We've also reached out to the universities to see if they have any space available.
Thank you. That was a question from one of the participants, whether post-secondary spaces have been accessed.
Yeah, so we have been working with our partners to ask for extra space where need be. And with the survey that was sent out last week, and another one's going out this week, as someone mentioned, Eden mentioned, we had a 67 return rate, and 80% of parents who said they're going to send their kids back to school. So we also sent out a survey to our teachers as to what if they're returning. So and majority of them, I would say 90%, said they're also coming back, right? And those who are not returning, they can teach remotely, right? And so we're really like in different territories here, right? One of the concerns people have is they've asked me as well, Chris, will kids be in the same cohort if they're in remote learning? And unfortunately, no, because we're going to have a centralized area in regards to remote learning, and we'll have educators from across the city in one place teaching kids 30 or whatever at actually 28.9 if I look at the numbers here. And which upsets some parents because their kids will not know a lot of these kids that are in the same classroom. But again, we're trying to be nimble. We're adjusting where we can. There's still a lot of unknowns, and I said earlier we're working closely with Toronto Public Health and the Ministry, of course, and our own senior team. So yeah, that's what I have to offer support.
Going back quickly to this question of advocacy, Eden, as a parent, I was going to ask you a question. Yes. I was going to say,
go for it.
As a parent, what would you need in order for you to feel safe sending your kids to school 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks from now?
Okay. Well, I will be honest and say that as a parent and as a public health professional, there's a 95% chance, and as a Black mom, there's a 95% chance that I will be homeschooling my children this year. But to answer your question, so I think, especially around advocacy, I think one of the first things we need to recognize is, and this is true of the pandemic, this is true of the ministry when it comes to education, is that there's a need to recognize the labor of women in our communities and in our country. And whether that I'm talking about our labor as mothers, as parents, I'm talking about our contribution to the paid workforce, I'm talking about it all, right? There's been a lot of conversations in the media lately about women being forced out of the workforce, and also just this idea that somehow they're going to make it work. Right? We're just expected to make it work. And also, of course, recognizing that the majority of teachers are also women, right? So I think in terms of advocacy, I think that is one of the main things that I personally am focusing on is on and have always focused on is recognizing the impact that this is having specifically on women, on marginalized communities, right? I think another key thing is to understand, recognize, and maybe even challenge what is the role of public schools in Ontario and in Canada. So I'm a member of our parent council at our elementary school, and one of the first things we did when the pandemic struck and schools were closed was mobilize around getting food gift cards to families, because a lot of our students depend on the school for nutrition. We serve breakfast, we serve lunch, we serve 2 snacks a day at no cost. And so some of the recommendations and some of the policies that are coming down are going to have a huge impact on that. So just to touch on what Chris was saying, I'm one of those parents who is extremely concerned about the idea that my son would be placed into a remote virtual school and completely cut off from our public school, because what does that mean for our students who depend on the nutrition programs? Like, how does our school support not only the kids who are in the school, but also the kids who are going to be forced into virtual learning? How do we make sure that they're being fed? How do we make sure that they have access to, I think Jill and Michael both touched on this, the social supports that come from school, especially for, LGBTQ students, for students from various backgrounds where they rely on those supports, for our disabled and special needs students, right? How, for myself, my son is going into grade 2, and in grade 2 there's testing that happens for placement into gifted programs, right? How are we supporting these things? How are we going to ensure that we're recognizing the role of schools beyond just being a place of learning, academic learning? And this is something that for Black communities in particular, we have a lot of concerns pre-COVID, right, around equity and around how our students are being treated. One of the issues that came to mind for me when I was speaking with our principal is that, we're now expected to adhere to daily attendance for virtual learning. So what are the implications for parents? Because we already know that there are discriminatory practices around which parents get reported to CPS, around how this plays out for families who are already in the system, right? If a parent is working from home, and there are a lot of moms I know who are working jobs that they're expected to actually be logged into their computer from 9 to 5, they can't even turn off the screen, right? And now they're asking us to do the same thing for our students. What are the implications around attendance, around lateness? One really concrete example for me, I live in an apartment building, 23 floors, and we have 4 elevators. Because of COVID, only one family can be in the elevator at a time. So how is this going to impact the ability for parents to get their kids to school on time? And what are the implications for those parents then, right? And then looking at that from an equity perspective. So one of the things our principal had said was, well, we're not going to necessarily report people for being late. Well, now we're moving to a virtual system. So our principal doesn't have the ability to help families with that. What happens to those families, right? For me personally, the concern is not that my son will not be in a class with kids that he knows. It's that we're going to be pulled out of our public school support system, which does so much for families. And how are we going to ensure that families still have access to that? How are we going to ensure that students still have access to all of those things? So I think that's where I think we need a lot of advocacy, is around recognizing that schools are more than just a hub of academic learning, recognizing that teachers, like Michael said, do more than just teach, right? That students develop relationships with teachers and with administrators. And also, how do we support teachers and principals and administrators and all the other staff, custodial staff, lunchroom supervisors, bus drivers? How are we supporting these individuals to make sure that they feel safe and that their families are safe as well, right? And just I saw a comment about using the Queen's Park lawn. So I think outdoor classrooms is a huge, I guess, radical idea that has been put out there. And I know the TDSB has put out some language around schools doing as much as they can to accommodate that. I think we need more advocacy around that. I think outdoor classrooms, at least for the next few months, are a wonderful idea. A lot of schools have the space to be able to do that, but there are other concerns, right, around safety and accessibility and things like that. So I think that's another area that there's room for advocacy. I mean, I think all parents should be on the phone every day right now, calling our Premier and the Minister of Education and leaving voicemails and sending emails every single day, because there's so much room for them to step up at this point that I think parents really need to focus on doing that advocacy and recognizing that our teachers and our administrators and our principals are all supposed to be on vacation right now, and they're doing everything they can to make sure our kids are safe, but we need that support, financial, to come from above, right? We need that from the government. I also think there's room for advocacy with the federal government. I think it's ludicrous that CERB is ending just as kids are being asked to go back to school and parents are being asked to make this false choice. I think it's ludicrous that there has been no rent deferrals. I think it's absolutely horrifying that eviction moratorium has been lifted, and now we're going to be seeing a whole bunch of other issues that are going to exacerbate the pandemic, right? And making it really, really hard for parents to make safe choices and to make the choices that are best for our community, right? So I think there's a lot of room for advocacy.
Thank you, Eden. Now, Eden spoke to this in her answer, but I wonder if anyone has anything to add. How do you think the challenges of the back to school plan or plans, let's pluralize plan, impact LGBTQ2S families specifically? Jill? Mute.
Did I jump in there, Chris? Were you about to say something? Okay. I think I mentioned it earlier. Because of quarantining, because of COVID-19, many of our young people have been essentially stuck at home. And sometimes home isn't the most safe, acceptable space for them. So I definitely think that, a virtual return, a part-time return, any kind of return that takes students away from that potentially safe space, is something that's going to disproportionately impact our 2S LGBTQ2 plus families. I also think, and just sort of riffing off of what Eden said, when we think about a lack of rent control, a lack of rent relief, no rent freeze, no increase in minimum wage even, we have to then also think about queer, trans, and gender nonconforming families, and where many of our community families are on the economic scale. The unemployment within our communities, the underemployment within our communities, the gig economy, piecing things together to see what works, to hold it in place, realities of many of my friends, of my family members, of people I know in my communities, you know what I mean? All of that surmounts to not being able to make the choice necessarily of keeping your little one at home, So again, it's an illusion of choice. Again, if we talk about, racialized families, Black families, I think of my own family where we're an intergenerational family, for instance. Every move I make, I'm thinking of my 70-year-old mom who has her own health complications. I'm also immunocompromised, So how many of those families are our queer families as well, our trans and gender nonconforming families, who are responsible for so many other members, our elders, our seniors, and are afraid of being that grade 4 teacher and potentially bringing something home in an overpacked classroom. I want to make it very clear that, I have heard of classrooms, my colleagues have heard of classrooms that had in some cases over 40 students in them. So let's not pretend as though, packing kids in like sardines and expecting the world from our teachers, is a new thing that started because of COVID. There have been complications around class size for a very long time. So I think that, like COVID-19, like, systemic racism and structural racism, like classist impact, like the impact of classist policies, like Bill 184 that makes it harder, or should I say easier, for tenants to be evicted, by the LTB and their landlords. Here we are again, sitting in a space where the most vulnerable folks in our communities are going to be disproportionately impacted, not only by COVID-19, but by the structural discrimination, by the laissez-faire, to pony on Michael's words, the indifference in a government that's not recognizing the urgency of this. Like, let's not play politics with people's lives, I don't want to turn on CP24 to see what the premier is going to say next. If you're a parent, you need to have the information in place as soon as possible, or a guardian, or an auntie, You know, in many of our diverse families, it's aunties, it's grandparents, it's a community that's raising a child, the entire village. Everybody has to know ahead of time. You know, enough of these sound bites. Give people a transparent plan. You know, invest in our kids, invest in our education workers and our teachers and our staff, and listen, most importantly, to our public health officials. I can't say that enough, because it's, you know, this is life or death. This could potentially be life or death. And we have to come out of it better on the other side.
Michael, then Chris.
Thanks. Just to answer your question about how, like looking at this with a queer and trans lens, I'll say a couple of things. One is, as some of you might know, I'm also very active in GLAD Day. And GLAD Day launched an emergency fund for queer and trans artists, gig workers, tip-based workers, cash-based workers at the start of the pandemic. We've had over 3,000 people apply for that. We've been able to help over 1,200 people. But that means that most people didn't, you know, still means that we have only been able to support maybe 35% of people who applied. But looking at those, but we actually asked for demographic information in those applications, and I'm going to share some of that with you. So one thing we know is that the majority of people who've applied are women or are trans identified. About 30% of applicants have dependent children. Okay, so you know, sometimes there's this assumption in you know, heterosexual communities or people that queer people don't have kids, but we actually know, I mean, Planned Parenthood knows for sure that in fact, you know, queer and trans people have a higher rate of teen pregnancy than heterosexual folks, and so you know, there are lots of kids. So again, and probably a majority of applicants are racialized as well too. So we have you know, folks in need who've lost 100%, 90% of their income, you know, who maybe were making good money as servers, you know, maybe working in strip clubs, doing some gig work on the side, cleaning houses, right? A lot of people had 2 or 3 or 4 gigs, all cash-based, all require close, you know, proximity, and all of which aren't restarting on September 8th. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there is a real dire financial situation for folks. And so, you know, I think part of what we're looking at in the TDSB is, you know, whether the kids don't go back to school, or they do it remotely, or they come back, all of that is going to be an increased cost. School costs money. And the more it's different than normal, the more materials, supplies, structures, snacks, you know, there's a cost to it. And so I think that, so absolutely, you know, queer and trans parents are some of the most marginalized and financially precarious parents in the city. So just to make it really clear. The other thing to think about is that a lot of families, and sometimes students, choose which school to go to based on their perception of safety, right? So yes, there are neighborhood schools, but you know, some people move to neighborhoods because they think maybe it'll be easier, right, for their kids. And so, you know, if those same families aren't able to have kids attend in person, you know, now who knows what kind of homophobia or racism is going to be occurring, you know, whether through microaggressions or overtly in online sort of remote learning. So I think that's an issue too. And I think, you know, a school like mine, you know, we've been explicit about our trying to improve you know, queer and trans inclusion and content. We've been explicit about trying to reduce anti-Black racism. We've been explicit about trying to support students, you know, with different learning styles and with disabilities. You know, we're not perfect. We have a long way to go, but it is known that we are openly trying to change. We're receptive to feedback, and we try to hold ourselves accountable, which isn't true in all schools. And so, you know, families maybe have chosen our school for that particular reason. And now, you know, for kids to be in small cohorts, to not have a wide variety of teachers to contact, and maybe to end up in remote learning, I know I don't have a lot of solutions around that, but there'll be an impact on that. You know, kids won't necessarily see themselves the material that they might be getting, and especially if teachers are rushed. I mean, one of my concerns is teachers are being asked to really recreate units, recreate lessons, quickly deliver lots of content. I mean, I've been teaching 20 years and I'm nervous, and I'm a great teacher, quite frankly, and I'm nervous. So like, good luck for everybody else. And when you're fast and when you're rushed, you don't do a good job at equity. You don't do a good job at diversity. You don't do a good job at inclusion. And so I know that maybe like life or death is more important than inclusion right now. But we shouldn't just throw away all the good work we've done because this has been set up to fail.
Chris, anything you want to add there?
As I mentioned earlier, prior to being a trustee, I was a counselor for 22 years, and working with those who are under house and a lot of runaway kids. And all those kids in Toronto, who go to Covenant House or Turning Point, they are homeless queer youths. And I know from working with them, a lot of them actually attend the public school system, our high schools. And another reason why I feel so strongly that, schools open, because while school is closed, these kids are in the shelter all day. And we know, and based on, data that we have, we know that, a lot of them are assaulted in there or, abused or don't feel welcome depending where they're at. So just another reason why I think, it's important for kids to go back to school. And just, again, we mentioned about mental health and, that's part of the reason why. But I also wanted to touch again back, in regards to going back to school. Now, the TDSB, we spend $23 million on PPE, right? Be it hand sanitizer and cloth face mask and other garments for our staff. And again, that was not funded by the province. This came out from our own budget. And we actually put it as a separate line item in the budget as a deficit, because we're not allowed to be going to deficit. So, we've ordered 600 PPE cloth and masks for teachers and for staff and, for bus drivers and everybody in the system. And that's important to know. And I know someone mentioned too, outdoor classrooms. We also looked at that. But, again, to buy these large tents to put in the fields, those tents are not cheap, right? And then within those tents, you also have to buy ventilators or, so that for the airflow. And another piece to that too is that if we were to purchase those things, because we don't have the money, we cannot ensure their safety at night, because we don't have resources, security to actually make sure that people don't vandalize those tents. So that's not realistic on our end. And busing initially, we looked at busing, having 15 kids in a 72 seat bus. And just a week ago, we were told that, the buses will be full and no social distancing in the bus. I think someone alluded to that. And, kids will have face masks on. So it irritates me that, we wouldn't want that in our workplaces, in an office building, or maybe perhaps even at Queen's Park, right? Because I've seen the way the MPPs spread out, in the chamber. But yet, we're asking our most vulnerable, our children, because we as the adults in the room are supposed to look after the best interests and advocate on their behalf. And, I feel, we have failed them somewhat. Not the TDSB per se, but, as a society, as a collective, we definitely, have caused more harm than good to our young people. And again, this is why we need to continue to advocate and push where we can and when we can with this government. But just know that as a system, TDSB system, we do have the best interests of our students and our staff, at heart. And this is why we're actually going into deficit the way we have, to make sure that, our kids and our staff are safe. Mm-hmm. And I know someone mentioned busing at some point too in regards to spec ed. So I mean, yes, we're staggering the back to school, But, our SPEC kids will have priority, and they'll be first and the best, or they will be best first. And even in my own ward of Toronto Centre, University of Rosedale, we have 2 congregated sites. And these are kids, with very high needs where they actually need to be hands-on, like feeding them, clearing the feeding tubes and all those things. And again, clearly you cannot have social distancing there, right? And I feel so badly for the parents now who are home with these kids 24/7 right now, because school was a huge help to them, I mean, and now they're doing this 24/7. So again, they are a priority, and we are providing extra PPE to those to the staff in those communities to make sure that N95s and gowns or whatever they need to make sure that they're able to support their students safely.
I know Jill has to run to another meeting and wanted to just say one more thing before she has to go. So we'll get back to you, I promise. But I do want to let Jill say her final word before she has to run. And get off mute one more time, Jill.
I just wanted to say thank you for coordinating this Seed and Sprout, and to all the panelists who are on here. Some I know more personally than others. Thank you for being champions always for kids and for our students. And just with regards to advocating, I cannot ask people enough who will or are watching and listening, reach out to your school board trustee, write to them, write to your MPP, also write to the Minister of Education, and of course the PA as well, Sam Osterhoff, and to our, that's parliamentary assistant, sorry, jargon, and also our Premier. I know that sometimes folks might feel the letters just sort of go anywhere, and maybe for some they do, but we read them. We read them, we stand in the House, we use them as material for debates, we use them to help organize rallies, conversations, community discussions, recommendations to our schools, to our decision makers. So I cannot stress it enough, even though you might be feeling exhausted, and you have every right to be exhausted, please do tap into your elected officials, because every single one of us, regardless of our party, are working for you. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Jill. I really appreciate your participation and all you've had to share, and also your work at Queen's Park on this. It's been really valued. So good luck to you, and thank you for your support.
Absolutely. Now we're off to tenants advocacy.
Excellent.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. I'm very aware that we only have about 25 minutes left before this panel wraps up. Time is going very quickly when we talk about something as important as education. So I want to make sure we have time to address any questions from participants. So if you have any questions you would like to ask our panelists, or anything you would like to share, you can either jump in now, or you can type a question into the chat, either to Gabrielle or generally, and we will get to those questions.
Can I answer your last question very quickly? And it's actually building off of one of the comments.
Absolutely, thank you.
And Michael had said at the end when he was speaking that I think you said life or death is more important right now. So just from my work in mental health, I just want to bring out the point that, we know that especially for queer and trans children, youth, families, parents, that social support and social inclusion are huge indicators of positive mental health. And one of the conversations I've seen in the background around the pandemic and social isolation is concerns about increasing rates of suicide. So I do think, and so there was a comment from somebody saying that, from Ari saying these concepts shouldn't be mutually exclusive rather, and I completely 100% agree with that, social supports that our communities provide, that schools provide, are extremely important, especially for marginalized communities, including queer and trans communities. So I think that we absolutely need to be having those conversations as well.
And just to be clear, I do see them as equally important, but I understand that, to like, you know, more kind of mainstream folks maybe watching at home or thinking about things, the idea of having 30 students in a class seems more dangerous than losing, you know, all queer and trans curriculum, right? Or losing every you know, student group in every school. But that is what we're looking at. And like you said, you know, there's a lot of kids. I mean, we've all worked with youth, I think. There's a lot of kids that we know they make it to the next day because of the clubs, because of the lesson, because of that important adult in the room that they have a connection with. And so we are going to see, I'm sure we have seen, in fact, you know, increases of suicide rates in kids and youth. So I do think it is serious, but it's just, I think that it is a challenge when we're so focused on like this material illness, this really physical, you know, this imminent illness, to talk about equity and inclusion in a way that we're not, you know, dismissed around it, I think is a challenge. Oh yeah, and thanks Ari, I understood that, your comment.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to jump in with or share in the chat? I know someone had asked also about schools that already have inadequate resources. So a lack of working sinks, inadequate bathroom facilities, whatever it is. If that was the case in March, how can we expect that anything's going to have changed by September? Anyone?
Well, again, at the TDSB, I mentioned, you know, we've gotten hand sanitizer for each classrooms so that kids learn from JK right up to grade 12, and, you know, learning how to use that properly. I know that there's some concerns around those items because, you know, hand sanitizer is toxic to children, so they have to learn how to use that properly and how to, you know, it's also flammable. Which is a little scary, but so that's one of the things that we're doing is actually hand sanitizer. And again, like I mentioned, wiping things down. We also hired extra custodial staff to clean the schools on a regular basis. So at an extra cost again to us, the TDSB.
I don't see any questions, so if I'm missing yours, please tell me. But does anyone have any questions they want to ask out loud?
I'll just add to that last question about stuff. I mean, as a teacher, I'm totally on a wait and see basis. Like I want to, once I show up into the building, I'll see. For example, I don't think my school owns a webcam. And all the webcams we own were in laptops that have now been distributed across the city. So I'm just like, I assume that if I'm going to be doing virtual learning, there's going to be some physical equipment for me to be able to do that. But I know that when I left the building, it was pretty sparse. It was low resolution for sure. Many of them didn't have Ethernet cable plugins. They only had Wi-Fi capabilities, which we know decreases the quality of the stream. So I just think, there's a lot of, I mean, I know this isn't a safety thing, but we're talking about making a huge jump in technology. I'll believe it when I see it. And we're also dealing with the staff that have a wide range of skills and abilities around technology. Like I help a teacher every week print, use the school printers. So I mean, asking those folks who still find printing the challenge to now move to like synchronistic learning on Brightspace with digitized rubrics. And, I just think it's going to be, it's going to take a bit of time.
And parents too, right? Like, I think there are a lot of parents also who, like, I know there was a parent in our school who said, I don't use computers. I haven't used a computer in 15 years and I didn't know how to navigate Google Classrooms, right? So let alone the students, right? Like the JK kids who are expected to now be online. That'll be interesting.
I know that was a huge issue for me with the prospect of online learning. My 6-year-old doesn't type, so I spent a lot of May to June as a very underpaid secretary typing messages to other 6-year-olds. So definitely a challenge for our younger students as well.
There's a question in the chat about, and I'm really glad this question was raised because I also have the same question. Around whether school council, parent councils are allowed to fundraise and crowdsource for things such as air purifiers. And Meredith says, I know it's an equity issue, and at the same time, I know that my children's school doesn't have an HVAC system. So I think that's a really great question that a lot of parents are asking right now.
Yeah, I could probably try to tackle that a little bit. We have discussed that because some school councils have reached out to us, asking if they could fundraise for these items. And because it's an equity issue, we've actually said no. I don't think it's up to the provincial government to fund education. It's not up to parents to fund education, right? It's one thing, if you raise money for, pizza day or whatever, or school trip, but parents shouldn't be fundraising for ventilators or tents and those sort of things. I think that's asking too much. And again, it goes back to the equity issue, because you'll have, and my ward is very very diverse, right? My ward includes schools in Rosedale and Yorkville. I also have schools in Regent Park and St. Jamestown. And I have 34 schools in my ward. And I could tell you each one that, how much money is raised in each school. And there's a clear equity issue there also, which we are always addressing. I'm always addressing anyway. And I do think, one of the things I advocate for is that sharing the wealth, right? If one school has a lot, you should share with the school that doesn't have as much. So again, back to your original question, I as a trustee don't support parents fundraising for ventilators and tents and those sort of things. That is a provincial responsibility to fund education and fund these things.
Okay, thank you. So there was a question from a participant about what about special education support? So people coming in and out of classrooms to support students. If teachers aren't allowed to go room to room to room, how are classroom teachers going to get support for their students who might have additional needs? And Michael responded that this was a reality in his school and that he hasn't been told anything about special education so far. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Michael.
I can add to that just to give kind of a case study example. So we have one head of special ed and basically the equivalent of an additional full-time teacher to support, I think our IEPs, or students who were identified for support, was between 350 and 400. So it's a significant number of students. And so of course, we would offer a resource time as one of the main tools. So students would be able to work with a special ed teacher, and they improve their learning skills and organizational skills. But of course, they get basically one-on-one support sometimes with tasks and homework. But on top of that, our special ed department goes well above and beyond class time. So we offer really robust after school tutorial sessions. They coordinate a whole peer tutor support program. So basically kids can get, free support from other students in older grades, oftentimes with their work. The room is always available at lunch, right? The kids are packed in there and they're working. I mean, they're doing coursework. The space is also available for any support with testing, any assessment. It has the best technology, sometimes in the school. It has the teachers who are the most receptive, the most able to help kids advocate for themselves. So we don't have teachers going to rooms per se, but that one space is a pretty essential hub. And I'm not sure what happens to that. And for those I mean, it was already undersourced. It was already understaffed. It was already really struggling to meet the needs of those hundreds of students. As a classroom teacher, of course, I'm responsible for providing differentiated and accessible instruction materials and evaluations for my students. And I can do that, but there is a wide range of needs, and a lot of students do need a time outside of class or additional time with a professional to support them. And of course, it'll be no surprise to anyone that tends to be the white students whose parents can afford private tutors and private supports that tend to excel if they have identified needs in an academic setting. And our school, is able to, in some ways, equalize or level the playing field a little bit by making sure that the students who can afford it still get some advantages and some supports in addition to that. So it's another layer of questions, and I'm not sure, we haven't been told anything, so I'm not sure what happens. Or special teachers are actually going to be reallocated to become classroom teachers to help lower class sizes.
Okay.
I can probably answer that. So even in the remote learning setting, we are going to support kids with special needs. And that question has been asked and answered. And we've also hired more social workers to also support kids with some mental health issues and mental health support. Is it enough?
Thank you.
That's the question.
That's certainly a big question. I am aware that we only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give you each 3 minutes and 20 seconds to share your final thoughts before we move on to our afternoons and evenings. And I'll say just now, thank you so much for being with us and participating in this really important discussion. I really value all of your contributions and the time you've taken out this afternoon. So again, just moving in order of my screen, let's start with Chris.
Thank you again for inviting me to partake this afternoon. So I just want to start off by saying that, we've worked right through the summer on this. I've been a trustee for 4 years, going on 5, and this is the first time we actually haven't had a break. And our senior team has been working flat out all summer long. I'm afraid that, they may actually be close to burnout. But, we're very thankful for the work that they've done and they continue to do. I encourage parents who are listening to go onto our website, tdsb.on.ca. There's a comprehensive information on there. Unfortunately, I couldn't go through it today. It's all very important material, but it breaks down for elementary and for secondary. The cohort A, cohort B, how the day is laid out, all those things. And there's some nice graphs and pictures in there too, so it's easy to understand. I know principals are back in the school this week. They were back on Monday. So I know some people have problems with the survey also. And there's a second survey going out, so please look for it. It's more simple. I also have a copy of it here today in front of me. So it's really 1 or 2 questions. Are your kids going back to school? Yes or no? Or are they going to do remote? Yes or no, sort of thing, right? So we have a clear understanding as to what September will look like and how many kids will be going back to school and how we can figure that all out. But reach out to your school principal if you have any questions, of course to your trustee, but I do really encourage you to go out, check our website out. We've had so many feedback from the public, and the plan that we have in place now really reflects that. And is it perfect? No, but it's important to remain nimble. Right? Again, this is a living document. It changes, it has changed several times already. And I wouldn't be surprised if it changes again come September, right? Because there's a lot of what ifs out there also. And as I mentioned earlier too, we work very closely with Toronto Public Health. They've been a great partner with us. One of my colleagues, Stephanie Donaldson, is System Public Health as a trustee and advises accordingly. I sit on the provincial table myself and Ontario Public School Association to give advice to the province directly. So there are many there, and we were very close with the federations. They've been a great part in all of this also. So we were getting feedback from all sorts of people from every strata. So so yes. So if you have any concerns, again, reach out to your school principal. Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for today. And I will say that I do think the TDSB has done a good job with the hand it's been dealt. And so I am appreciative to be teaching in this board at this time. And it's a very complicated, structure and system with a lot of challenges. And so, I am grateful for that. So I just, I know, we talked about a lot of negative things, but I do think it's important to recognize that that I do have some trust with the TDSB in some areas, and that they are doing their best while still recognizing things are undersourced, and that, I do wish we had a little more local autonomy in ways that we lost with the Harris government. And I will also just end by saying, thanks everyone for today, because it's made me think a little bit more about like a queer and trans and anti-racist lens going into the school year. So much of going to school year, I'm thinking about, my workload, my stress level, my ability to manage expectations. I'm thinking about safety. I'm thinking about, cleanliness and sanitation. And so, it is important that it's like, well, if folks like us aren't going to keep the spotlight on anti-oppression, we're not going to keep the spotlight on queer and trans issues and racism, then who is, right? And so I think that for, folks watching at home, one of the things that we should be doing is to not, it's like we can do more than one thing at once, right? I can fight and advocate for the physical safety and security of my students and for the emotional well-being and anti-oppression of my students too. So anyways, thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And Eden.
Thank you so much. This has been a really eye-opening conversation. I think a few points I would just end with. First and foremost, I think it's really important for parents to communicate, and that is with your local schools, your administrators, your principals, but also with your children. I think we forget that, our kids have been going through this for 5 months. My JK to be is 4 years old, but he already understands so much about what's happening. And he, just from being out and seeing that we're in phase 3 now and the playgrounds are open, and he understands, the difference between social distancing and our social bubble and things like that. So I've had a lot of conversations with him, and at this point, he has expressed that he's not comfortable going into school unless everyone is wearing masks, right? So have those conversations with your children, and then make the decision that works best for your family, recognizing, of course, all of the constraints around the choices that we have to make. But I think some parents feel like there's a right answer and they're just not sure what it is. There is no right answer at this point, from a public health professional. Even people in public health are not withholding information. We just don't have the information at this point. So it's really important to think about your own values, your own priorities, and make the decision that works for your family. And then, manage your expectations within that as well. And then again, communicate that back, right, to your school and your administrators. A lot of principals and teachers, right, are very creative and also have a lot of experience with all kinds of different circumstances. So communicate with them. And then the last thing I will say is please keep applying pressure to our governments. Email, make phone calls, connect with other parents, because I guarantee you, if you have a question, there are hundreds or thousands of other parents out there who have the exact same question or the exact same challenge. So there is strength in numbers. So whether it's contacting your parent council, if your school has an active parent council, connecting with, social media, parenting groups, or connect with us, connect with me, right? And talk to other parents about what their concerns are. And then let's just keep putting that pressure on the government to support our teachers and support our school boards and support families as much as as much as we need them to.
Thank you so much. And I think Gab is going to finish the conversation off.
Yeah, I'm just gonna close us off for the evening. Thank you all for coming and sharing all of this information with us today. I'm really grateful and have been given a lot of food for thought, and I hope that everyone else did as well. I'm hearing that the strongest advocacy tool as parents is to continue to speak up, ask questions, challenge ideas, maybe even offer ideas, and to check the TDSB website and see the information that is out there. And I'm also hearing that everyone is doing what they can, doing the best that they can, and I hope that, I don't know, I'm hoping for the best. And I also wanted to share that Seed and Sprout is hosting another virtual event about going back to school this Saturday in collaboration with College Montrose Children's Place. This session will be diving into how to support your children's mental health and wellness as we navigate into this transition. And I really appreciate you, Eden, for bringing up that important topic of speaking to our kids directly about what's going on and hearing their thoughts, ideas, and opinions, because it feels really important. And yeah, again, thank you so much. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. We will be sharing this recording on the Seed and Sprout Facebook page and adding subtitles as well. If folks have any questions about this or want to find out how to be in touch with the panelists that were in attendance today, you can reach out to us on the Seed and Sprout Facebook page.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.